Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 8th session of the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference hosted by the University of San Carlos with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. PIQC is a collaborative project of the National Quincentennial Committee and 15 other agencies, universities, and professional national historical societies. Around 100 Filipino and foreign scholars, diplomats, officials, artists, and scientists will deliver lectures related to the theme Situating the Filipino and the Philippines in 1521. This 8th session re-examines the Visayas region in relation to the wide-ranging international trade networks of the pre-Hispanic period. The paper presentations highlight the rich and vibrant culture of trading in the Visayas. We would like to welcome our attendees here on Zoom and our viewers on the Facebook live stream from different universities, government agencies, and private institutions. I am Regina Yoma from the University of San Carlos Museum, and it is my great pleasure to moderate today's session. But before we proceed, I would like to mention a few reminders for our audience members. Your microphones will be on mute and your videos off through the duration of the session, but you may send in your questions for our speakers using the Zoom Q&A or by typing it in as a comment for those who are tuned in to our live streams found on the official Facebook page of NQC. We will try our best to accommodate all your questions for our speakers. We would like to also request to kindly mention your name and affiliation or institution before mentioning your question. Questions from the audience will be entertained during the open forum at the end of each presentation. Now, we shall begin our program with the singing of the national anthem. As all, here's a message from the President of the University of San Carlos, Father Narciso Celian, SVD.
Hello everyone, greetings from the University of San Carlos and from the city of Cebu. First and foremost, allow me to express my apologies to all of you for recording this message inside the car. I am currently traveling and I am in a noisy environment, and thus I have to stay here inside. I would like to welcome all the participants, as well as the organizers, and of course the scholars and experts who will be presenting to us their findings and their ideas on the theme, the Visayas in the Maritime Silk Road. Welcome indeed to this online Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. It is an honor for me and a privilege to be able to address all of you and to be somehow part of this event. We are all aware of what the pandemic has done to us, how it has changed our plans, our priorities, and even our way of life. After more than a year of grappling and dealing with the impact of the pandemic, we are still not out of the woods, and the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel is yet to manifest itself. Whatever headway we have been able to make already in preventing the further spread of the virus and preventing as well infections is always tempered with humility and caution, for COVID-19 continues to mutate and has become more transmissible and difficult to contain. Hence, the global community has been put on notice that the crisis is far from over and that we need to work even harder together and find ways to be part of a solution rather than of the problem. But if there's one thing that we might have learned already from the pandemic, it is that we are truly connected to each other. Connected by something intangible and invisible. Connected across space, for new mutations reach our shores no matter how hard we try to stop them. Connected also across time, for the present will certainly compromise our future in the way that the past has taken shape of our present and the current circumstances. In fact, economists and financial experts are now analyzing how the Philippines and other countries, for that matter, will be able to bounce back. And the prospect of economic recovery will certainly vary from country to country depending on certain factors. I think interconnectedness is something we can use as a framework for this conference in appreciating as well and highlighting the importance of this conference. The theme, as I mentioned already, the Visayas in the Maritime Silk Road, offers plenty of insights on how the exchange of goods between people in the Visayas and their counterparts from other islands and across the seas created interconnectedness beyond the sphere of commerce and trade. This aspect of country's history is certainly worth investigating as part of our attempt in understanding who we are as people and what lessons we can draw from it. On this note, I would like to welcome you once again, all the participants, organizers, and our resource persons to this conference. Thank you and God bless.
Soy's welcome message to everyone. Thank you very much, Father Celian, for the warm welcome. And now, to give us an overview of today's session, we have the University of San Carlos Museum Director, Dr. Jose Eleazar Reynes Versales.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Reg. Something's wrong with my headphone. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. And excuse me, on behalf of the University of San Carlos Museum, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session 8. The session has 4 presenters, and we will tackle the role of the location of the Visayas in the Maritime Silk Road. The Maritime Silk Road was first coined by the German founder of modern geography, von Richthofen, in the late 1800s, to explain the connections between Europe and the Greco-Roman world with China, basically along the caravan routes. The Maritime Silk Road concept came out after the colonial period, when many scholars in the post-colonial years started questioning the Eurocentric approach to the trade that was going on in Southeast Asia. These papers, this morning and this afternoon, will discuss this trading from the viewpoint of what was going on in Southeast Asia. If you are familiar with the idea of the Maritime Silk Road. It started to appear in the 60s and 70s, and it rent asunder the colonial narrative that it was the Portuguese and the Spaniards that started all the Southeast and the Dutch that started all this trading in Southeast Asia. In fact, the Maritime Silk Road concept shows that even before the colonial powers came to Southeast Asia was very vibrant with trade. The papers this morning will talk about the location of the Philippines in that trade. We have Dr. John Peterson, who will talk on always at the edge of empires, the Philippines in world trade in the early modern period, where he will show where the Philippines was in the whole discussion of the Srivijaya, Majapahit, and of the trading that emerged after these empires collapsed. We also have from Australia, Dr. Peterson, by the way, is an archaeologist, and he will be introduced by Regina later. We have from Australia an independent researcher, my good friend Genesis Velez, who is completing his doctoral work. He will talk on where Cebu figures, or where the Visayas figures into the maritime trade, and why it doesn't appear. From the Song to the Atang Song to the Yuan period, and he will look at, because he can read Chinese or Mandarin, he has looked at Chinese records to see where Cebu and the rest of the Visayas begin to appear. The third paper is my presentation. Will be a discussion on archaeological excavations conducted in downtown Cebu City, as well as in downtown Cebu City, to look at the primacy of Humabon's port of Cebu and whether it figured directly in the maritime trade with the Chinese, or whether there was an indirect trading, as Dr. Peterson and Genesis Mr. Velez will posit this morning. The final paper, not the least of course, is by Dr. Earl Jude Cleope, Vice President for Academic Affairs at Silliman University and a historian. He will talk on the archaeological excavations that were conducted by Silliman University in the 70s and in the 80s. I hope you will join us and continue to stay with us in this whole event. This is the University of San Carlos panel, session 8. Thank you, Reg.
Thank you very much, Sir Jobbers. We hope that all of you will be able to join us once again in the afternoon for the second panel of this session. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our two distinguished speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. John Allen Peterson. Dr. Peterson is an anthropological archaeologist specializing in historical ecology and landscape studies. He has worked in the American Southwest, Texas, Northern Mexico, China, Congo-Brazzaville, Ecuador, and currently in the Philippines. In the Philippines, he has conducted community archaeology programs through the University of San Carlos Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History Community Mapping and Heritage Preservation Program, and has worked extensively on heritage programs with the freely associated states of Micronesia in Pohnpei, Yap, the Marianas, and also in Guam. He has served on the State of Texas State Board of Review, the State of Hawaii Historic Preservation Board, the Guam Historical Preservation Board, and landmark commissions in San Elizario, El Paso, and Socorro, Texas. Peterson is currently the president of the International Committee of Archaeological Heritage Management, a scientific committee of ICOMOS in support of the World Heritage Program. He is a visiting professor at the University of San Carlos and an affiliate faculty with the Department of Anthropology, University of Hawaii, and editor of the Philippine Quarterly of Culture and Society. Our second speaker is Dr. Genesis Velez. Dr. Velez is originally from Cebu, Philippines. He finished his Bachelor of Arts major in philosophy in 1997 at Christ the King Mission Seminary in Quezon City, and master's degree in theology in 2004 at the Philosophische Theologische Hochschule St. Augustine in Germany. He learned both Mandarin and classical Chinese during a 2-year intensive language course at Furen University in Taipei, Taiwan, between 2006 and 2008. He then attended the PhD program in Sinology at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany, under the supervision of Professor Roderick Tak, a renowned scholar on Chinese maritime history. From 2005 to 2011, he was a research assistant at Monumenta Serica, a sinological research institute of the Society of the Divine Word, SVD, in Germany. In 2020, the School of Business and Economics at the University of San Carlos, he organized a special Chinese course for SBE professors and instructors. Afterwards, he migrated to Australia, earning his master's degree in social work from Flinders University in 2016. Since then, he has been involved in the social services sector in paid and volunteer roles. Although he is no longer in the academe, he still works on an ambitious and lifelong project, doing an annotated translation of Zhongzhu Buji Zong Yoguan Feilubin Ziliao Hubian, or the collection of historical materials on the Philippines in Chinese classical books. And now, without further ado, here is a pre-recorded presentation of Dr. John Allen Peterson of his paper titled Always at the Edge of Empires, the Philippines in World Trade during the Early Modern Period.
The Philippines was already participating in global trade in the 15th and 16th centuries before Magellan made his fateful landing in Limasawa and Cebu in 1521. Asian export pottery is found in abundance at sites in the region from the Song Dynasty, 960 CE, and it was carried into the hinterland as well as accumulating in dense middens in the coasts. The bulk of trade was brokered by Moro pilots and by the sultanates of Brunei and Sulu. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Spanish practices of encomendero and reducción were largely unsuccessful in disrupting traditional exchange and transhumance patterns. But the Spanish Empire did dislocate trade for the sultanates and replaced it with Asian connections through Manila. By the 17th and 18th centuries, captives from the Visayas were exchanged through trading ports in Makassar and in Malacca by Tausug and Iranan raiders, who traded them downstream through British and Dutch parties, thereby fighting a proxy war with the Spanish in the southern Philippines. Raiding and trading items for the Maritime Silk Road was indirect and down the line from the Philippines, and the edge of exchange was in the zone of conflict south of the Visayas. On the other hand, exchange through the galleon trade in the late 16th century with China and New Spain through Manila was robust and likely replaced direct trade brokered through the sultanates after Spanish intrusion into the region. Throughout much of this longue durée, the Philippines remained at the edge of empires, remote and fiercely resistant, until Spain co-opted native resistance through the same mechanisms that were effective in New Spain, the mission, the presidio, and the hacienda. The Philippines is a social construction made up of more diversity than unity, and more far-flung islands loosely connected by kinship and language groups than by central places and hierarchies. Those have emerged as a consequence of commerce and empire and colonialization, rather than organically from the Filipino landscape in a native imaginary. What the Spanish recognized as a unified place was not perceived in the same way by native Visayans and Lumads, Moros, and Tagalogs, who had a broad concept of their own places and landscapes, but only vaguely recognized an expanded polity of the Philippines. The Spanish encountered a fragmented pastiche of cultures and languages and strived mightily to join it all together into something they could manage. What they found also was that the archipelago had never been aligned or politically allied with any outside polity or people. There had been penetration. Srivijayans had perhaps been trading in the middle of the first millennium. By the 10th century, Majapahit boats were hauling rice from Java to Butuan and other places down the line. By the 14th century, the Moro traders from the Sultanate of Brunei were actively visiting with Filipinos in loosely structured communities in Mindoro and Manila and Panay and Cebu and Bohol, and leaving behind porcelain and silk in exchange for forest products and dried tripang. But there was no central place, no central polity, and no so-called entrepot until the Moro traders in the south and west and the Spanish from the north imposed them on the realm. Any other trading had been down the line from the Moluccas outward with spices, an exchange that grew in the colonial era as cloves were highly prized in Europe for meat preservation, and cinnamon, nutmeg, sandalwood, etc. were unique products of the region. They had moved through the region prior to European advent and were mentioned in shipping bills of lading in Guangzhou before the 16th century. And Ternate did become a source of cloves to outside traders in the southern commercial zone. As Rodney Patak concluded, how did cloves reach Sung China? Some sources on pre-Sung and Sung maritime trade mention the Moluccas but are silent about direct connections between China and these of the other eastern Indonesian areas. Nor is there any evidence of East Indonesians living among the foreign communities in China's ports. Hence, it appears that Java, Srivijaya, Champa, and perhaps Butuan on Mindanao, if Butuan is really Butuan, functioned as the chief re-exporters of cloves to the Far East. The first two places and Butuan probably had the most direct access to the Moluccas, while Champa probably received its clove through the Indonesians themselves or through the foreign community resident on its shores. However, there is no clear evidence pointing to direct connections between Champa and eastern Indonesia, nor can I find any written statement on Philippine merchants sailing to the North Moluccas. All this might imply two things. Comparably, few ships sailed through the Celebes Sea, and if consignments of cloves passed through this area, they were likely to change hands in Butuan before reaching Champa or China. However, in view of Srivijaya's and Java's commercial influence, most cloves arriving in Sung China probably left the Moluccas by way of Java. Traders were contacting collection centers in the Moluccas and possibly in Butuan, but elsewhere it may have been more sporadic. Were there centers for trade? Pigafetta notes the extended settlement for 7 leagues along the shore in central Cebu without any indication of a primary or central settlement. Certainly it wasn't marked by monumental architecture, and even the Datu house was probably as modest as all the others. The chiefly palisade wall around the Datu's house in Tanjay Negros, found in an archaeological excavation, was the same dimension as the typical Visita compound and was likely from the early church rather than any chiefly center. The Spanish appear to have created the same central places in the Philippines, while the locals relied on networks and dispersed places. The Spanish didn't first explore the interior of Cebu, but remarked that locals were hard to keep on the missions. The native inhabitants would perhaps attend the mass, but disappeared into the hills to their highland residences. Perhaps they occupied stilt balai along the shore when visiting the coast for fishing, much as the residents of Dalaget are known to have done from historical records. A study of pottery and constituent elements using ICP-MS technology was done to examine patterns at the Salug Church in Valladolid. Earthenware pottery was found on the floor of the church during excavation. It was compared with earthenware from a Neolithic site in Karkar and Kamasuhan in the highlands, as well as with modern traditional pottery made in Sibonga, and with a clay source next to the Salug site in Valladolid, known to have been used in the Sibonga potters. The clay also underlay the walls of the church, and radiocarbon dating of the clay and the soils determined the clay to have formed from about 1000 to 1200 AD. The modern pots matched the clay, but none of the other pottery had used that source. The Neolithic pottery was made 1,000 years before the clay formed. The Highland pottery was made from a source adjacent to the church, suggesting that the permanent residence was in the hills and that the Salug site was only occasionally occupied. Sherds from Bohol from across the Bohol Strait, interestingly, did match the Tuyum source, suggesting cross-straits interchanges may have been stronger than interior coastal interaction. In any case, the lack of local pottery suggests that the reduction did not work, at least in the early years of the missions in the era 1599 to 1622, during the short life of the parish. Many sites in the eastern coast of Cebu have abundant Asian export porcelain on the ground surface mixed with local earthenware sherds. Was this a commercial exchange from as early as the 10th century when Song Dynasty celadon can be found on some sites? And was it an indication of a commercial entrepot in the 15th to 17th centuries? Aside from debris found abandoned in excavations, it also appears with burials from the period, such as in Bohol. The pottery was evidently valued, but what was the character of the relationship to the pottery, as Arjun Apatarai asked about the social life of things? Robert Fox noted that the clear ringing tone of porcelain ceramics from China along with its pleasing appearance, made it an invaluable ritual element. The dance around the altar, first one direction for 7 rounds, then the opposite, was accompanied by brass gongs and porcelain tinklers in a mesmerizing tonal celebration. Fox suggested that the value of the pottery was for this ritual accompaniment rather than for commercial exchange. Chiefly, dispensation would not have captured the artifacts in an exchange network. Rather, it was a participatory network in the ritual life of the community. Fay Cooper Cole documented these rituals from the 1890s in Bukidnon, and Emerson Christie describes the rituals among the Subana. We witnessed these same performances in Zamboanga only a few years ago. The porcelain is secreted below the house when not being used in the ritual. It is not for sale. There is considerable longevity to these cultural patterns, at least known to outsiders for the past 350 years, when Alcina described them in Samar, and more recently over 100 years ago in Mindanao by Cole. Given the continuity of material culture at burials and hilltop ceremonial sites, they appear to have been practiced for at least the past 2,000 years. The hilltop Alionar site in Kanya near Karkar was first excavated by Rosa Tenazas in the 1970s. A retired vet who had married into family in Napo found basalt adzes and earthenware pottery on the ridgetops around Napo, on a ridge called Tinguis locally. He attended one of Rosa's courses at the University of San Carlos and then introduced her to the sites. Rosa found an infant burial under some stones, much broken debris from small jars, and juvenile pig bone. She interpreted it as a Neolithic period ritual site, noting the burial as a significant element. We revisited the site in 2005 and confirmed her findings along with radiocarbon age from about 2,000 years ago from charcoal in a rock feature. We had just attended the Black Friday Subanan ceremony in Tanggu and were astonished at the similarity in setting and material culture and the absence of any residential features on the small hilltop site. It was a powerful observation site for celestial events and patterns with a panoramic view to the eastern sky. Recently, we found what we believe is another of these sites in the Quintorian Hill near San Remigio, Cebu. The hill is in a similar setting with a commanding view of the northeastern sky, as well as the shoreline and valley where San Remigio is located. The hilltop has several cobble alignments crossing the crown of the hill in parallel lines and a small mound of cobbles at the center of the hill. The debris from many small, broken earthenware jars is scattered among the rock alignments as well as on the hill slope, climbing to the hilltop. There are no residential features, and the alignments are not similar to terrace walls on the lower slopes built to retain soil for corn and other crops. If there is any kind of central place in the Visayan landscape, it would be these ritual foci where Orion could be viewed rising in the evening sky, or solar events could be commemorated. Notably, there are few 15th to 17th century porcelain sherds found at the archaeological sites along the coast that we documented in our first field season of the North Cebu Archaeological Project. Burials excavated at the San Nepomuceno Church and at nearby Lapyahan are from the Metal Age, or 500 to 700 BC, or CE, and the grave goods are locally made earthenware jars, some used for cremated remains. Notably among the grave goods is a very unique ceramic disc in the form of a linglingo, found on the chest of a burial that was found in the 2011 excavation season. 2 more large ceramic discs were found in the 2021 season without the distinctive linglingo shape. Another is documented in a collection in Manila found at the Gigantes Island near Panay, a straight shot from San Remigio across the Visayan Sea. Were these markers of cultural identity or ritual alliance? It appears to be a sign of a shared culture in this region. It denotes the linkages of peoples among islands in a maritime network. The central places don't appear to be entrepot, but another kind of power site, perhaps linked to the observation hills that may be scattered widely throughout the region. No one has ever really thought to look for it until now. From the outside looking in, these sites were probably not recognized by the Spanish. They are impermanent sites on permanent landscape features. Rickety wooden frames with a platform surrounding roasted juvenile pigs, small earthenware jars holding aguardiente or possibly tuba, boiled eggs and other meats, all of these decaying rapidly in the atmosphere. Only the pig bones and broken jars survive. Unless seen in action, they would not have been perceived as places of power. Rather, the Spanish eyed these locations as ilihan or defensive refugia sites, if seen at all. From the inside facing out, however, these sites must have been central, secret places in the landscape that linked networks of people in kinship and language families in the locality, but also regionally in a shared tradition. There appears to have been a shared Neolithic tradition throughout the Philippines from the earliest known sites, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, with some perhaps earlier, but the material culture is simple and expedient. Earthenware pottery with some decorated pieces with indented designs, such as the Orion butterfly design from the Alianar site. And occasionally, chert flake tools and expended cores are found in the sites. Crude, but it is thought that bamboo was a far more abundant material for arrow tips than chert and far easier to work. But no red slip pottery until 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And these appear to have been a fugitive slip without a durable finish. It is generally eroded. Later, in the so-called Iron Age, circa 2,500 to 1,500 years ago, a higher quality finish appears in vessels used as funerary urns in caves. Bill Solheim called these the Kolonai type and linked it to traditions in mainland Southeast Asia with nearly identical treatment, morphology, durable red slipping, and occasional indented or incised decorations, sometimes in elaborate swirls around the shoulder and body of the vessel. This style appears rapidly in the region, but the general Neolithic tradition described above appears to have been persistent throughout the region alongside this new phenomenon. Were these different people living in coeval landscapes with different identities? Lorena and others found that the earliest mainland people to arrive in the Philippines entered through the northern Cordillera around 8,000 years ago, and groups with different genomic origins but distantly related continued to appear throughout the archipelago and are linked from the north to burials in Surigao. Coastal maritime peoples may have traveled widely and quickly through the region, using the highly mobile prahu that sea nomads still use among the Moken and the Bajau. But even peoples mainly living on land could have roamed the length of the archipelago during several periods of land bridges, as frequent in the region as every 100,000 years or less. So the earliest known Homo erectus hominids posited for the Kalinga site or the Urubo site in Nuevo Ecija easily transited the region. Later, people so far included in the aDNA studies indicate distinctive populations, but with some common genomic connections. In any case, they do appear to share many common, if somewhat generalized, cultural features throughout the region and through the longue durée. But they were never apparently joined in an archipelago-wide identity as ancient Filipinos. It was left to the Spanish and other outsiders to reify indigenous populations into rationalizable groups like Visayas or Igorots. Only later were the differences in language and culture and genomes realized. We now have trade records that mention cargoes entering and departing Guangzhou that record the scale of trade to and from the region. They show a changing trend from the south through Indonesia, specifically Makassar, Java, and Sulawesi, that traded east into the Moluccas and to Butuan. This may have been down the line through the region and transferred in Malacca. This shifted in the 15th, 14th, and 15th centuries to trade through the north, transiting Brunei and the Sultanate, and taking advantage of places in Mindoro, Luzon, and Palawan, as well as possibly Cebu, where Muslim pilots driving Chinese junks made ports of call to exchange silks, porcelains, and stoneware with possible comestibles like rice in the containers. They received dried trepang, hardwood, needed partly as ballast for the return voyage, bird's nests, shark fins, and damar for caulking, and other forest and marine products. It was a routine trade, perhaps annually through most of the regions, but did not create trading centers, so far as we know, that were central places in the native mind. They were occasional or conditional locations with good anchorage, protection from storms, and access to sufficient population from among the scattered villages and residences along the coasts and in the highlands. They do not appear to have grown into formal ports with improvements in permanence. They were persistent places, in the words of Sarah Slanger, but not improved ports. These were not to be developed until Spanish settlers built harbors, forts, churches, and roads along the shore. Then they became central places for trade and hierarchical and stratified governments. Nonetheless, it appears that the native places persisted in the shadow of urbanization, and Europeanization has scattered unfocused villages and belie along the coast and scattered throughout the highlands. These connections were the first contacts by an external global network and were selective and few at the beginning. But by the 15th century, when Muslim culture proliferated in the region, the Philippines rapidly entered world culture, albeit with a Middle Eastern flavor. Within a century of this earliest world contact, Portuguese merchants entered the region from the west, and a few decades later, the Spanish expedition of Magellan introduced a Western Christian colony in the Philippines that was to be fully exercised after 1565 with the arrival of Legazpi. They soon moved to Manila, lacking sufficient food in the Cebu area, and displaced a nascent Muslim community established by the Brunei Sultanate and more cordially sponsored a Chinese Parian community as trading partners in the region. The ultimate Portuguese goal was the spice trade, while the thrust of Spanish trade was direct connection with China and its ceramic, silk, and stoneware heritage. Ultimately, through the Manila Galleon, Manila became the nexus for exchange of silver from the New World for China's production. This pattern of cultural invisibility continued throughout all of the known history of the colonial encounter. In the age of the occasional junk laden with porcelain, perhaps as early as the Tang or surely the Song dynasty, a few foreign artifacts accumulated sites from these periods. By the Yuan period in the 14th century, greater stability and support of commerce, the Mongol usurpers led to regularity and increase in trade routes, switching to the northern reach of the Philippines. In the 16th century, Spanish settlement and the establishment of the galleon trade even more regularized this commercial network. Our excavations at the Jesuit house in the Parian district of Cebu City shows that there was robust exchange from the late 15th and early 16th century that rapidly grew in the late 16th century in volume and diversity of materials, to include stonewares from mainland Southeast Asia and late Ming Dynasty Wanli period ceramics, as well as a novel high-fired ceramic with stamped designs that could be something similar to Manila ware, or possibly ceramics imported from Myanmar, as thinks possibly John Mixick. This period of interaction among foreign and indigenous cultures also had evidence of native cultures like fish corrals alongside the edge of the sea, late 15th century remains of the now extirpated native tamaraw, and chicken bone and fighting implements like an iron blade or tari found at the Jesuit house. Clearly, native Visayans were interacting within a vibrant network of materials and culture, and already expressed a vital shared culture throughout the region with connections even into the northern and southern archipelago. For example, Tausug, Iranon, and Balangingi were perhaps already intrusive from the Sulu Sea raiding for slaves in the 17th century, and gold was found in burials in Cebu that could have been from sources in the Agusan del Sur or perhaps Masbate or Ilocos where gold was mined. But was Cebu City an entrepot or central place before the Spanish created one in the center of eastern Cebu? Or was it one of many good anchorages along the coast where precisely the same material culture is found in archaeological sites with notable differences in relative periods and densities, but not in any place demonstrative of a permanent central trading platform? That concept of a networked environment extends to all of the Philippines before the Spanish. There appear to have been many local places with good anchorage where offshore traders could stop for exchange with local villages. But except possibly Butuan, did these grow into established trading centers until the age of foreign colonization? And further, there does not appear to be any dominant extensive material culture that would denote a Filipino polity or even shared vision of a Philippine archipelago. The Philippines were thus invented by the outside world, and that is not a revolutionary viewpoint to recognize, but that the Philippines was so well hidden from the larger world of empires and commerce until so late into the 16th century is remarkable. There were sallies around the edges, maybe occasionally junks would penetrate the interior, but the world largely was unaware of the diverse and dispersed peoples living in the region. So much so that Filipinos were exhibited like zoo animals at the Columbian exhibition in the 1890s in Chicago, and anthropological visits to the interior still encountered remote people throughout the early 1900s, and even as recently as the 1970s, when Taucidae were discovered in southern Mindanao. The Philippines were still at the edge into the late 20th century. Nonetheless, the resilience and adaptability of Filipinos appears to be very persistent and robust. With increasing globalization, Filipinos now occupy most of the world as OFWs, spouses, students, and professionals entering into American, European, and other first world centers. They link Filipino communities through remittances and immigration of expanding family networks. The intrepidity of people who quietly but steadily settled in unknown archipelago now practice that skill and adaptability globally, and may be from the early times until now one of the most adaptive collective populations in global history. Thank you.
Peterson's presentation. Thank you very much. I think Dr. Peterson is already here. If you have any questions regarding his presentation, he will be able to answer them. Do we have questions from our attendees? You can use the Q&A box, or if you are tuning in via Facebook live stream, you can actually leave a comment on the live stream on the NQC official Facebook page. All right, do we have questions from the group or participants? I think they're still warming up. But thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I'm very curious about burials, because since I was able to join the archaeological project here in northern Cebu, I'm very curious about what other artifacts are often seen in different archaeological sites in Cebu, aside from burial goods or grave goods. Are there any other sort of artifacts or materials that will actually help in establishing a period, or in order for us to assume a sort of a network of the Philippines to other areas?
Thanks, Regina. Yeah, actually, burials are probably the best documented. They're easiest to find, and they have really good preservation. Mm-hmm. But we've been doing regional survey for 20 years now. And one of the things, of course, we found at the beginning was when you walk along the shoreline in places like Karkar or Cebu City or even Liloan or a bit north, sometimes you're literally crunching on pottery in the ground, on top of the ground. It's incredible, beautiful blue and white porcelain from China and so forth, probably late Ming period. But then when we walk in the highlands in the interior, we find very highly dispersed artifacts, maybe one every 10 square meters, one sherd. And often it's not the Chinese late Wanli period material, but it's often a bit earlier, during what we call the Ming Gap, when the Chinese were not trading globally from their kilns in China. And instead, the Thai and Vietnamese potters stepped up and made a sort of a crude estimation of, I don't mean that disparagingly, but of the Chinese porcelain. And we find those sherds abundantly in the highlands. Now, is this a matter of people living in different periods, more so in one area than another? We don't know. We don't have enough data yet. But it also suggests that people, when they did live in the highlands, were probably living on small belies next to very mobile swidden farming areas. So they would grow crops in an area for a year or two or three, and then move to another area and perhaps move their whole residence. And then along the coast, on the other hand, we think probably people weren't living there full time in the balies along the coast, even though the Spanish thought it made it look like there was a huge settlement on the coast. We think actually that people were living there occasionally for fishing junkets. And in fact, in the ethnographic record, there are accounts of, for example, families of farmers in the mountains who would go to their balai along the shore on Saturday, maybe Friday night and Saturday. They would fish, and then Sunday morning, the family would go to Mass, and then by Sunday afternoon, they'd walk back into the mountains to their farm patch, or perhaps even still, in many cases, swidden patches in the mountains. So people live in the landscape a lot of different ways, and it's not permanent in any one place. One must think about it very flexibly, I think, and adaptively. So in other words, during that period in the Ming Gap, we find lots of imported pottery scattered in the mountains along with earthenware pottery. Were more of them resident in the hills then? We're not really sure. Mm-hmm. Other artifacts are less common. We look for stone tools, and we know that there's some areas in Negros, northeastern Negros Oriental, that have some possibilities and potential for finding these. These might indicate earlier Paleolithic peoples. We're hoping to find more of those in Cebu during the Northern Cebu Archaeology Project. And of course, the jackpot would be the very old Homo erectus era, 700,000-year-old sites, which we have landscapes that could actually have supported the Karkar Formation in the western side of Cebu. Some farmers showed us tektites, a very small item, but something that came from an asteroid that hit the Earth in China 700,000 years ago and scattered through the region. Anyway, they're there on the land surface, which has eroded a little bit, but it's still a highly, a lot of potential there to find this earlier 700,000-year-old settlement like the Kalinga site in the northern, which is in the northern Philippines, which is incidentally on the same age landform as the Karkar Formation. So a lot of exciting stuff, different kinds of artifacts, but the majority of what we'll find is probably in the burials. And so far, we only have in Cebu burials from, say, right around 1400 to 1600, and then, for example, in Bohol. And then we have, of course, the San Remigio from 500 to 700 AD or CE. So we've got a lot of work to do. The biggest problem is there's been so little work, so we need to make sure we get more field time. We got to go next week. Let's go.
It's really more challenging now to do archaeological projects because of the pandemic, but it's very exciting.
Yes, it is. We just dodged it in San Remigio when Regina was there. We got in during a period of very low contagion, and we got out before it started, and now it's dropped again. So we're kind of all getting eager to go back up.
All right. John, we have questions from our attendees now. I'd like to read the first one. It seems that there is no trading center in the Philippines. Kindly enlighten us. Some are saying that it's Butuan, Mindoro, Vigan, Manila. Were these the centers of trade?
I think so. As I read the records and read great interpreters like William Henry Scott and others, I think those are, in whatever literature is available, which is very sparse, they seem to be named most frequently and perhaps misidentified. It's hard to tell. But at least in the early Spanish chronicles, Butuan and Limasawa appear to be more of a developed center. And there's a lot of talk about the materials coming in there. And then, of course, the trading records that Rodney Doc documented. Be interested in hearing what our next speaker has to say about that if he studied with him. So that's fabulous. But anyway, he documented that there was trading with Butuan, at least very roughly in the literature. And seems likely that they could have been trading to the Banda Islands down the line, or nutmeg, cloves, other spices, which grow pretty much only there. But Manila seems to have been a Moro settlement within a Chinese Parian that was very quickly developed. Apparently it was there when Legazpi arrived. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, yeah. And so I think that there's much talk about how they went north because of the inability to find enough food on Cebu. But on the other hand, a real burning desire for the Spanish was that to tap into that China trade. They actually, they were interested in the spices too, but I think that China trade was something they thought they could uniquely capture, and they did for several hundred years through the Manila Galleon. Now, Mindoro is named as an early site, but there doesn't seem to be much to support any settlement that's really very dynamic or very permanent. And if you read all the descriptions of Cebu when the Spanish came, there did appear to be some political power there, maybe some tribal power from the leadership, but you don't read about monumental sites of any kind until the Spanish settled it. And in fact, as we look around the downtown, we've been working on the Patria site for several months. We first thought, it's right there near the Cebu Cathedral, near the Plaza Independencia. We're going to find lots and lots of burials from the right before the Spanish period, must have been the center of the village, and we didn't find any. But as we looked at the maps, we've been doing environmental maps of downtown Cebu, and as we studied the maps and LiDAR data and so forth, I think it's becoming apparent that actually that area where the Patria was a wetland, overbank flooding, probably not a permanent marsh, but at least during periods of flooding. And so people would not have been building houses on it. and would not have been burying in it. Interestingly enough, we found a horse there. And this is going to be a fantastic question and hopefully contribution. We're right now doing biometric measurements to find out if it fits into possibly having been a horse from Asia, maybe brought in by Indonesians. And if not, if it came with the Spanish. There are very different biometrics for both of those varieties of horses. And we're working with Noel Amano at the Max Planck Institute in Jena in Germany. And this will be an exciting addition to the literature. But the disappointment that we had in not finding burials may actually have turned into some new insights into the whole development and evolution of the downtown Cebu landfill.
Yeah.
So
Still progress.
Yes, still progress. And I think there were a couple of other questions. Since I finished so early, we might as well keep
yeah. A lot of time to accommodate questions. Here's another one from M. Binamira. Hello, thanks for the interesting presentation. To say Cebu City was an active trading entrepot before the arrival of the Spanish could be, as you mentioned, just because of good anchorage. A trade center as we know them to be today was not a regular activity of Cebu City?
Well, I don't think there's any evidence that it was. And I have to say that a lot of the models that came in to interpret archaeology in the Visayas emerged from a whole school of thinking at the University of Michigan in the 1960s and 70s. Very, very good scholars, excellent scholars who really made a huge difference and a contribution to global theory and so forth. But it was very materialistic and very neo-evolutionary, which means they followed this model that had first been sort of proposed in the 1950s, that societies evolved organically like people. And they evolved from band level organizations of egalitarian peoples up through small tribes with maybe a chiefdom or something, then through ranked societies, and then finally into states. And the way the proposal worked, it sounded almost inevitable that people would evolve into our wonderful civilization of today with our states that are destroying the planet. So wonderful that they're actually destroying our nest. But anyway, the whole idea was that the trend in human evolution and societal evolution was toward hierarchical organization with a king or a political leader at the top, and then layers of administrative peoples and so forth. But I think we've recently, probably in the last few decades, but especially very recently, I think we've sort of begun to realize that model doesn't really fit too well. And beginning in the 90s, a historical ecologist named Carol Crumley developed a theory about heterarchy, meaning that power can be shared horizontally. It's a model that fits the Philippines a lot better. And it implies people that may be a leadership role in a community, but they don't necessarily accrue wealth. And in fact, the other part of this is that objects or things are not just commercial. We think of that because that's the way we perceive the world today. But I think we really seriously need to look at things for their social value, for their religious and ritual value, like the porcelain. I have to tell you, I didn't hold that slide on long enough. I'm very sorry. But the dancers around the altar in Zamboanga, in the Subanan ritual, that was really eerie and mysterious and mesmerizing, the sound of the tinkling. Imagine hitting a porcelain bowl and then it's tinkling, and then the gong, 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 and then they're drumming on bamboo cores and things too. It's incredibly mysterious and mesmerizing, and it would definitely have set the stage to help transport people into more of a religious sort of frame of mind. And by religious, I don't mean like Catholic Church religious. I mean like, pagan religious, animistic religious frame of mind. So the social life of things can change quite dramatically. And I think the commercialization or our vision that these were commercial trading items is really is misplaced. The other thing is, these theories from this Michigan school also embraced some theories that were being developed at the time for Southeast Asia, which, for example, with Bennett Bronson, modeled trade happening along river courses into the interior. Well, this works great for the Mekong, which is a tertiary river with many branches going out, and riverine travel by boat. It doesn't work for primary drainages, single drainages with no tributaries and no depth in the Philippines, especially in the narrow islands like Cebu and Negros and so forth. You can't travel by boat on those arteries, for starters. You might walk along them. They would at least be a course through the hills. But as you know, if you've tried that, it's very rough, sometimes the more difficult route into the highlands. Excuse me. And so the Bennett-Bronson model, the river tributary model, just doesn't really work. And yet it was applied to interpretations in Visayas by students of this Michigan school, as was the whole model of chiefdoms, based again on this neo-evolutionary model of human society. And chiefdoms were everywhere. In fact, one of the books, if you counted the word chiefdom or chiefly or chief, it would probably be the dominant word in the entire book. It's almost a mesmerizing chant in itself, if you will. I think we were very mesmerized by the concept, but it's hard to find chiefs, and it's certainly almost impossible to find evidence that they accumulated wealth or that they lived in bigger structures. In fact, it was probably more of leadership was more a matter of wise decision-making, counsel, possibly also ritual leadership, and so forth. And again, central places in these theories are all modeled as economic. Okay, you put a trading center at the mouth of a river, and then you trade up and down the river, and the goods come down, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is they didn't exist. They've not been found. And if you think that commercial value of these things may have not been an issue or not been an important value for these people, then again, you say, why would they even organize themselves like that? The point is not to trade things for commercial value or even the power of the chief, Anyway, so there's a lot of discussion that's probably needed here, and if any of my Michigan colleagues would care to join in, I'm happy. But I think the power places are the ones we found there in Hintarihan. And that was a lucky find in many ways, except we saw by the name, and Jober's helped with some interpretation of the name, that it could have been a combination of a native and Spanish word, Torrejon, maybe from tower. The Spanish built lookouts. We thought at the very least, well, there's got to be like a little Spanish lookout up there. And bingo, we're climbing the slopes, and there are all these little broken pottery the size of, that could be put together in small jars, just like at the Alianar site and on the Subanan site, by the way. I think we really will be on the lookout for more of those in the survey, but I think we've really hit on what was probably the real power or central place in the region of our surveys.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, John. Here's another question for you from Palon Marie Andre. What do you think is the significance of the stone tools that you've mentioned earlier to the burial digs? Were they discovered in one location?
So they aren't usually discovered. Now, sometimes on sites with pottery, people haven't really maybe been attuned to find them, and they're maybe swamped by so much of the pottery they don't really notice it so much. Where we have noticed stone tools is usually on sites that have only stone tools on them. We have found a site up in Upper Napo near Karkar with a very crudely flaked limestone, dolomitic limestone cores. We call them cores because that's what flakes are taken from. And flakes, and these are in prehistoric, pre-Spanish sites, these are often used. In fact, in pre-ceramic sites, these are often used for their cutting and sometimes gouging qualities and so forth. Sometimes we find obsidian. Now we know that those were worked by people specifically brought in for sharp cutting jobs. We found obsidian on the Alianar site, and so did Raza Tenaces. We have found it in a few other sites. We're not really sure. I wish people could help with this. I think there may be a site where that's naturally outcropping in Negros. the only close sites right now are somewhere in the Solomon Islands, which seems very unlikely that it would be traded in that far. But anyway, obsidian is an obvious marker for a shark tool. Obsidian can be napped and flaked so finely that it's used. It was before the advent of lasers. It was used for eye surgery.
Oh,
Incredibly sharp, yeah. And people in the pre-modern landscape knew that. They selected for that tool. But just chert, the flints that you find, they'll form as solution deposits in limestone, and they're very fine cryptocrystalline, it's called, stone, and they can be napped and flaked into tools. But we don't find finished arrowheads. I worked in the Southwest and in Texas for many years, and there you get these beautiful, they're called arrowheads or dart points or whatever, beautiful, finely made. You've seen them, of course, many pictures of them. We don't find those here. And that's where I think some of us think maybe bamboo was selected as a better, easier tool to work and expendable. You shoot it once and it's easy to whack up another bamboo point. But in other words, they were using something because they weren't using the stone. The other thing then is the larger stone tools that are found and are usually part of tools that are used for battering or maybe chopping or hoeing. And those we haven't found many of, but there are some very prominent, very important sites in the Philippines that really need to be explored more. Some are there in Eastern Negros, shared by a collector who came to the museum. Lots of pictures of really incredible materials that he found there. And of course, another is called the Arubo site in southern Nueva Ecija. A farmer was digging a fish pond. He hit large boulders of chert, and around them were flakes that were obviously broken off, done by humans or hominids or something. And he went to the National Museum, and Alfred Pollock and Bong Gazong went out to check it out, and they were just astounded that the stone tools actually appear to be Acheulean, which means they would be Homo erectus era or 700,000 years ago.
wow.
And it's incredible. So these sites exist here. And that's what we're going to walk a lot of the hillsides of Western Cebu to look for things like that.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, we have an anonymous attendee. I think I'm just rephrasing his question. Have you debunked any information or any previous idea because of your findings in the field as an archaeologist?
Have I developed any theory, kind of overall theory for the Visayas? Well, yeah, a lot of it is coming out in the kind of statements that I've been making here. That I think we have to try to get outside of all of our modern, capitalistic, global ways of thinking about things and perceiving things, and as much as possible, try to see what it's like to see the world from a, for lack of a better word, pre-modern point of view. Anthony Giddens coined that back I think it was in the 80s. It works very well. Prehistoric, we've discarded. Savage, thankfully, we've long ago discarded. Pre-modern means people who have a very different way of looking at the world. Languages and sense of place and orientation to the landscape all play a role in this. And it's something we have to relearn, I think, as people within our modern world. We have to relearn those skills. Anyway, I think that people moved differently in the landscape before Europeans, and they had very different, they weren't so goal-oriented. There's a whole theory of Austronesian migration that many of us are very critical of, because it implies like a goal orientation. Like people in Taiwan decided to jump on boats and run over to northern Luzon, and from there they spread down the coast and out into the Oceania and founded these cultures and societies and blah, blah, blah. I think it's much more sophisticated and it's subtle, but it's, I think, much more realistic to think about migrations like that as a reticulate process. That word means it basically kind of interbedded and nested kinds of ways of moving around the landscape. And we have, like, if we look at ethnographic models of the Bajau and the Moken, we see that they'll go out for opportunities in the sea. And in those little boats, even by sail, they can go 20, 30, 40 miles a day, no problem. In a week, they can go a couple hundred miles, easy. And they go out, from ethnographic documentation, they go out to, say, fish in the lee side, say during the Amihan, they'll fish in the southwestern side of an island where the water's calmer. And then during the Habagat, they'll go to the other side of the island. But they may go 100 or more miles to a whole nother island. And then they may go visit villages that have kin through matrilineal kin systems, or that have items they want to trade for. And before, when they leave, this isn't all mapped out. It's not like mapped out in their head. It depends entirely on how the seasons progress and information they get along the way. And I think this kind of what I would call a reticulate migration is a much more reasonable way of looking at how people were migrating through the islands, through island Southeast Asia, and then into Oceania 3,500 years ago. When 3,000 years ago, it appears there did begin to become some radiocarbon dates from that era show that there was more expansive movement of peoples during that period. Not 4,000 years ago, that there wasn't much of anything at that time. No dates support that. But later, and then when you find those dates, they're all over the place, all at once. They're in Indonesia, they're in mainland Southeast Asia, they're here in the Philippines, they're in the Sulu Sea, they're in Mindanao. It's happening, and they're also beginning to appear in New Guinea in the areas that we call the Lapita area, which possibly came out of this process. But it's happening all at once. Well, of course, that makes sense because people could move so rapidly, and their way of perceiving the seascape was so different. I could go on about this. I don't know how much time we have, but basically, when people get in a boat, the navigators in Micronesia that I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with when I was at the University of Guam, when they get into a boat, they set off, but they don't go to Guam from Yap. Guam comes to them. It's a very different way of perceiving the world. They are in the center of their universe, and they see the constellations and the sun rising and setting and the moon rising and setting, and they sense where they are in the world, but they themselves are not moving. It's the world that's moving around them. So it's a very different time-space perception model than what most of us experience. We probably don't have the patience for it, for starters. But they have many subtle clues like constellations, but also ocean currents. And they learn this from their parents, the earlier navigators. Once they hit a certain point, they should begin to experience a current coming from this direction. And that they'll call, for example, the current that's formed from the gap between Guam and Rota. And then they'll begin to feel. So it's very subtle, but it's a spatial way of perceiving the world. And I doubt very seriously if anyone in Taiwan had a spatial model of zipping across a channel against a 7-knot current in a canoe, because they didn't have sailboats. Paddling, they couldn't paddle against a 7-knot current. If anything, they went back and forth from Taiwan to mainland China, and this is models developed by many people lately using linguistics and genetics. And then down along the South China Sea, along shores both in mainland Southeast Asia and in the Philippines. And that period of the coloni Sa Wen, that Solheim models, captures exactly a spread of cultures and ideas and peoples, and also pottery and languages and so forth that happened around that time, 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. So the timing's off on that other deal. But it's also the way of modeling human experience and human motives is I think, not really very robust. It doesn't really take into account these other much more subtle kinds of migrational patterns, reticulate.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Yeah, that's very interesting. We have actually a comment and a question, I think, on the chat box. She's Evangeline Lopez. I come from the Sibonga town and lived in the barrio called Candagit, the first barrio of Sibonga after Ocana, Karkar, which Dr. Peterson mentioned. I do recall some kind of excavation or treasure hunting of sort that went on at the time in 1960s. I had the occasion of finding broken pieces of Chinese ceramics in blue design. There is an old pottery making in Ocana, Karkar, in the barrio of Abogon. I wonder if Dr. Peterson has that in his documentation. Thank you. Are you familiar with that, John?
I am. Thank you, Evangeline. So the Abugon potters are the ones, in fact, that are using the clay source in Valley of the Lead, right next to the old Salu parish that we excavated. We excavated there in 2002. If someone was treasure hunting, might have been Rosa Tenazas, who wasn't treasure hunting, but it might have been Tony. I'm sorry, I don't mean this in any denigrating way, but they called him Tony the Moro. And I don't know his last name. He was a U.S. Vietnam vet, a black soldier. And they call him a Moro because he was black, right? But he married a woman in Napo and was well liked in the area. He had a little motor scooter and he went cruising all over the place. He found Neolithic adzes up on the top of the hills. And he's the one that found that site that Rosa and we both excavated. And he had some sense of what they were. And he took the material to the USC Museum. Most of what he found, I think, is there in whatever collections Rosa left behind. Anyway, the Abugon potters were also visited by Bill Longacre. And I have a small article where he mentions going there and talking to the potters. And then before he passed away, we talked about it. He couldn't recall that, but I'll have to dig out that article and find it. So the family there has been visited by them and by me. My wife's one of my wife's school friends is the daughter of the woman that runs the pottery, the family that runs the pottery. They make a fabulous, very well-made little jars and bowls for cooking, utilitarian use. I think they at least make those and sell them in the Karkar market. And they're very inexpensive. We visited them with the idea that, we wanted to learn how they were making them, but we also thought, what if they could imitate these colonized burial jars with the beautiful, carinated edges and the nice inverted rims and so forth. And they did. They made a few, and they were beautiful. They did a really good job. And we took them to the museum with the hopes that maybe they could be sold there to visitors. They're the right size for a tourist to buy and carry home in their luggage. And I told the potters, I said, if you made those, you could probably get at least 10, maybe more times the money making those. And it's almost identical to the market stuff they're making. And they couldn't believe it. They just thought that was funny. But we never got it off the ground. The museum never really followed through. And so now it's your turn.
This pottery making in Ocaña, Karkar, it's already an old livelihood for them.
Yes, yeah. At least 50 years, maybe much longer. I don't know. Evangeline maybe can tell us if she knows the family. Maybe we, it'd be a great ethnographic project for somebody to do for a master's thesis or something.
Right. And why did she discover the blue ceramic, blue and white ceramic?
That's just appearing on the ground around there near Abugon. There's one site that we were going to work on. A student from Ateneo was going to work on, or I guess it was at University of Hawaii at the time, was going to work on it. It's out in the mango plantation out sort of toward Ocaña from Abugon.
Yep.
And there's lots of blue and white ceramic there right on the surface and in the upper deposit. So it's all over in that area. Must have been a fair amount of coastal settlement, but there's no way to anchor, like junks and galleons in there. I don't think it could have ever developed into an entrepot of any kind like supposedly these other areas did. I suspect that those large ships stopped at places where they could, where the geography on the coast gave them a deep anchorage or some protection from storms and so forth. But much of the area is full of very shallow coral reef platforms, and there's just no way to land a boat. So the entrepot, quote unquote, I think emerged in places where people were already living but dispersed along the coast, but then wherever the ships could get near them is where there might have been a little more concentration. And then over time, with increasing Spanish settlement, they concentrated probably settlements in those areas.
All right. Well, Evangeline is really quite interested to pursue a documentation on
Awesome.
the pottery
Did she
making.
reply?
And she's hoping that she could probably meet you or visit you in your office when she's in Cebu.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. And if nothing else, we can do a messenger call to each other. But we come to Karkar. So my wife's family is from Napo, and I'm not sure when we'll be around there again. But we also keep in touch. Maybe send me an email. I'll put my address in here.
Yeah. Other attendees are actually asking if they could ask for your email address. Thank you very much. We have another question over here. I think this is from PIQC Technical Group. Good morning, Dr. Peterson. Was Samar Island, which is at the edge of the Pacific, involved or included in the trade route, or did it play any role in the early trading traditions of the Philippines?
The early Spanish trading, you mean? Well, most of it, from the galleon trade that was going a bit north of there, because it went from like Cavite and then over through Sorsogon. So it would have been the very northern end of Samar, would have been where ships were going out into the open Pacific. That would have been possible. The very earliest settlement through the south, for example, that's south of Samar, I think. I don't have a map in my mind. I'd have to go, it's around the corner, I'd have to go. But there was, I don't think there was any like direct landing on Samar. Somebody might, maybe Raleigh Boronaro could correct me on that. But I think if there was anything, it would have been in the north, the galleon trade going out through those passages to the Pacific, or in the very south, the way that the Spanish were first entering the region before they got to Limazawa and then up to Cebu, but not in the middle that I'm aware of. I could easily stand corrected on that and would be happy to be.
Were you able to include that in your map earlier in your presentation?
Well, there's nothing along that whole eastern side. At least the material that came from Rodney Tack and others, they don't show anything. And there were some anecdotal comments. Well, I'm not sure. I think William Henry Scott mentioned some things about maybe a big junk, like beginning in the Yuan dynasty period, would cruise through the area. Maybe they would often have, maybe they didn't have regular routes. It's hard to say. But once a year, each of those junks could carry 100,000 ceramic vessels. They're enormous, especially the ones during the early Ming period. And so if a ship went through, it wouldn't have to do it more than once a decade and unload stuff that make it look like a huge trading expedition and pass through 100,000 vessels. But again, the people, I don't think they were taking them for trade items. I would think they were taking them for ritual purposes.
This is all during the pre-colonial.
Yeah, pre-colonial. And then colonial period, that all pretty much, as far as I can tell, dried up. The Dutch and the English were entering the area through the Tausug and others, like James Warren documents, and conducting this proxy war against the Spanish Visayas and others. And then the other sort of exchange that was going on was mainly in the north with the galleon trade. And the stuff being traded out of the Visayas to the south was slaves or household members. Slave may not mean quite the same thing. But that and they weren't trading for durable items that I'm aware of. The English, this is funny, the English tried to introduce opium through the Tausug and Barangingi and so forth, and Ranan, but it didn't work out very well, and they couldn't get the Tausug to use it. But if you imagine, here's a people that are used to chewing betel nut, which is a mild stimulant, and if you need all your wits about you at sea, opium is not a very good drug to be taking to pilot a boat. They weren't interested in the opium. They tried to pass it off on the Visayans. They weren't interested in it. Eventually, it was traded by the English into China. This is all very interesting. It's the European powers that actually created the drug trade centuries ago. Anyway, little aside. I think James Warren shared that bit of information.
All right. We're down to, I guess this is a question regarding your publications or your feature publications. Will we be able to read them in the near?
Yes. Yeah, many are in. I've been publishing in the Philippine Quarterly for Culture and Society for many years, and also, so those are available to people who can access that journal. It's on JSTOR. Unfortunately, they charge unless you have a university account of some kind, but then they're available there at San Carlos Publications and in the library, of course. Also, I have publications in things like Asian Perspectives and the SPAFA Online, the SPAFA Journal. We just published an online article about the environmental history of Cebu. Go to the SPAFA, SPAFA site, and you can download that for free. And the Jesuit House, there's some of the Jesuit House material is in that. We have some other articles. We'll do a report on the Jesuit House, but that hasn't come out yet. That was a real wonderful source of material and the findings. And then our San Remigio project, ongoing now. We have some field reports, but we'll be developing them into long report publications, maybe book publications from San Remigio and Northern Cebu. Those are coming up. But I'd say the easiest things to access would be the Philippine Quarterly and then the online SPAFA Journal, which is, you can just download that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, just to inform our attendees, if you are very much interested to read more about the papers presented in today's session, the National Quincentennial Committee will actually be publishing all of the papers presented to you today.
Good.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for having the time to be here with us. And take care. Are you still in Germany?
No, I'm home after what turned out to be like almost 12 days of different quarantines in Germany and here. And I'm so happy to be home. I have to say, don't travel for a while. It's not worth it.
I see. Welcome back. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you again later.
Yes. I'll be around through the day. I want to tune in on my colleagues' presentations. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, so now we are going to proceed to the second paper presentation entitled From Exclusion to Inclusion, the Visayas and its Participation in Long-Distance Trade with China, to be presented by Mr. Genesis Velas, an independent researcher and a former fellow of Monumenta Serica. Sir Genesis, are you around?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yeah, loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, and I don't know, it's afternoon here in Australia, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this conference. I actually didn't expect that Dr. Bisales would invite me to this one. I was just contented watching all these talks, but so here am I today. So the title is From Exclusion to Inclusion, the Visayas and its Participation in Long-Distance Trade with China. Ferdinand Blumentritt, in an 1879 self-published article, puts forward the position that the Chinese merchants could not have reached the Visayas in the pre-Hispanic times. He cites the admission made by the captured crew of Abornia and Parral to Miguel Lopez de Legazpi that they bought Chinese copper and porcelain, as well as gongs from the Chinese and the natives of Luzon, and then bartered them with the Visayas with their native products. He notes that the first recorded encounter between the Spaniards and Chinese happened off the shore of Mindoro when the Spaniards sailed towards Manila. He then argues that if an earlier encounter had occurred when the Spanish dominion was still confined to the Visayas, the colonizers would have noticed it. Historian William Henry Scott re-echoes Blumentrit's position more than a century later, saying the presence of Chinese trade goods in the 16th century Visayas is a well-attested fact, but the presence of the Chinese themselves is more problematic. Scott pinpoints that while the post-Magellan Spanish expeditions received reports about the presence of Chinese in the Visayas and Mindanao, they had not encountered them not until 1569. He likewise mentions the Bornean pilot's admission that traders carrying goods from China were called Chinese regardless of their actual identity, and that Chinese ships, due to their size, could not navigate the inner waters of the archipelago. This somehow validates the fact that the Visayan term Sina refers to whether Bornean or Chinese people, and that a Chinese rotor published in 1617 did not include any direction traversing the inland Visayan waters. He also adds that the term Junco or chunk used in early Spanish accounts is derived from the Malay word jong, which refers to a ship built in Southeast Asia. There is seemingly a lack of discussion among historians regarding Blumentritt and Scott's position on the non-participation of the Visayas in the long-distance trade with China during the pre-Hispanic times, probably due to the scarcity of documentary evidence. Archaeologists, however, offer new insights into Visayas' participation in long-distance trade, ascribed to the fact that archaeological excavations in the central Philippines have yielded a considerable number of Chinese, Southeast Asian, and Japanese ceramics. This paper then aims to provide a new perspective on what Scott called the Chinese enigma. First, it lays out the context of Chinese overseas trading during the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties by examining the imperial policies of each period and assessing their impact on the activities of Chinese merchants. It also examines the Chinese perception of the Southeast Asian maritime space and the location of the Philippines in that space. Second, since Blumentritt and Scott relied on Spanish sources, this author shall attempt to elicit information from Chinese sources that refutes the alleged Chinese presence in the Visayas in the pre-colonial times. Finally, some possible scenarios concerning the participation of the Visayas in the long-distance trade with China will be explored. So China and the maritime trade. China's importation of foreign goods from Southeast Asia and beyond via the sea route was first made possible through the so-called Nanhai trade, whose development can be divided into three phases based on the products sought after in the Chinese market. In the first phase, which extended from 221 BC to 420 AD, China imported luxury goods exclusively for the imperial court from the Yue and Indian merchants, and later from the kingdom of Funan. The second phase occurred between 420 and 618 AD. With the growth of both Buddhism in China, a new market base for holy things was tapped. The surging demand for incense, ivory statues, and glass vessels eclipsed the importation of luxury goods, and the flow of most imported goods shifted to the worshippers in major urban centers. Eventually, the demand for drugs and spices supplied by Persian and Arab middlemen surpassed luxury items and holy things in the third phase, which stretched from 618 to 960 AD. With the collapse of the Tang dynasty, China underwent a phase of fragmentation known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period that lasted for 54 years. The foundation of the Song dynasty in 960 opened the way for the reunification of China. The Song dynasty initially gained control of the northern China and aligned its economy and diplomatic relations towards Central Asia and the regions beyond, with the Silk Road serving as a primary link to those regions. With the annexation of Guangdong in 970 and the establishment of Shibushi, or the Maritime Trade Office in that port city in 972, the Song Court set in motion China's engagement in maritime trade, albeit keeping it under the tribute system as practiced in the preceding dynasties. Initially, maritime trade was not a primary priority of the Song Court. However, China's political and economic realities made the government consider maritime trade as a potential income-generating enterprise. During the entire Song period, nomadic tribes to the north and west of China, such as the Mongols, Jurchens, and Liaos, attempted on various occasions to encroach the Song territory, which put pressures on the imperial government to increase its defense expenditure in order to protect its borders. Meanwhile, the Song government made the civil service examinations the only means for drafting bureaucrats, which eventually lead to the increase of the number of paid public servants. These two developments push the government to look for new means to raise revenues. At the same time, trends in the consumption change as more affluent consumers look for exotic and luxury items from abroad, and as low-value foreign goods became popular in the domestic market. One of the first moves of the Song government to address those issues was to increase the tariff on foreign cargoes from 10% to 20% of its net value, while reducing the government's involvement in the domestic distribution of foreign products. In effect, there was a shift in the local distribution of foreign goods from being a state monopoly to an enterprise marginally controlled by the local Chinese traders. However, it should be noted that the Song government introduced the classification of foreign goods into fine articles, or high-value products, and coarse articles, or low-value products. When the government reduced its market share of foreign products, it only gave the private merchants access to low-value products, which made up most of the imported items, and kept the local distribution of high-value products. In 989, the Song government allowed private merchants to travel abroad and bring foreign goods back to China. However, they needed to adhere to specific provisions. First, they had to register before their departure at Chinese ports with established shibushi to indicate their ports of call abroad. Second, they had to report at those ports upon their return for customs of inspection. Third, they had to limit their journey to one monsoon period, which means that they had to leave China in winter and come back by summertime. Unfortunately, compliance with government regulations was time-consuming, and the time restraint imposed on the foreign ships prevented many Chinese traders from engaging in the importation of foreign goods. Unprecedentedly, in 1090, the Song government allowed prefecture-level governments to issue travel permits to local Chinese traders, thus devolving the issuance of permits from a state to a local matter. The state, however, maintained its control over foreign ships coming to China. With the ease of acquiring permits to travel abroad, more and more Chinese merchants ventured into foreign trade and imported products sought after in the Chinese market. After centuries of defending its borders, the Jurchens gradually overpowered the Song army, which eventually led to the fall of Kaifeng, the imperial capital, in 1127. As a result, the Song court moved its capital to the port city of Hangzhou. This started the period that historians would call the Southern Song. The loss of its northern territory, traditionally the cradle of Chinese civilization, also meant the substantial loss of government revenues. Deprived of access to the Silk Road, the natural tendency of the Southern Song was to look towards the maritime region for diplomatic and economic relations. By 1234, the Jurchen-controlled territory fell into the hands of the Mongols, but it was not until 1272, under the leadership of Kublai Khan, that a dynasty in traditional Chinese style was proclaimed. The Southern Song coexisted with the newly established Yuan dynasty for 8 more years before finally succumbing to the Mongols in 1279. The Yuan government, however, maintained the Song's maritime policy with some modifications over time. For instance, the distinction between fine and coarse articles was retained. The changes that the Mongols introduced included the lifting of time restrictions for foreign trips, thus enabling traders to go to faraway places and stay abroad for a more extended period. Under the Mongols, Shubusi issued licenses to private traders and provided them with capitals and ships. Traders paid back the government by remitting 70% of their profits. In this sense, the Yuan government monopolized foreign trade with Chinese merchants acting as their agents. Nevertheless, the merchants became more competitive and aggressive since the government's financing scheme enabled them to expand their business. The Ming period, taking into consideration its attitude towards maritime trade, can be divided into 4 phases. The first phase started right at the foundation of the dynasty in 1368, and this lasted up to the early 15th century. Shortly after the foundation of the Ming dynasty, Emperor Taizu prohibited ordinary Chinese from traveling to the sea and ordered the closure of China from any maritime activity. The new restrictions were intended to regulate foreign trade and foreign relations and to stop private trading. With a maritime prohibition in force, only official embassies from foreign countries who sent tribute to Ming court were allowed to establish contact with China and engage in foreign trade. The second phase occurred during the early years of the 15th century when China dispatched a series of diplomatic fleets under the command of Zhang He. The expedition's aim was not to occupy trade outposts or establish colonies, rather the incorporation of the rest of the world into the Chinese world order and their admission into diplomatic relations with China and their integration into the Chinese tribute system. Although Zhang He never set foot on Philippine soil, Zhang Qian and other eunuchs sailed towards the Eastern Ocean and persuaded rulers of Borneo and the Philippines to send tribute missions to China. The Philippine polities of Himauli, Luzon, Fangjiashilan, Sulu, and Gumalalang sent tribute missions to the Ming court between 1405 to 1424. The third phase began after the end of those expeditions in 1433, with a ban on private trade still in force, and in the indirect trade between China and Southeast Asia was made possible for the Kingdom of Ryukyu, which maintained a regular tribute missions to China. Ryukyu served as an intermediary between China and Japan and Southeast Asia, with Thailand and Malacca as its principal trading partners. Furthermore, the inefficient control of the coastal regions, especially between 1457 and 1520s, and the connivance between traders and some local officials and leading Fujianese families led to the increasing rate of illegal trade. This also paved way for the subsequent rise of the Fujianese networks, which eventually dislodged the Ryukyuan merchants as the principal carriers of Chinese goods to Southeast Asia. The lifting of private trade restrictions in 1567 under the pressure of the governor of Fujian marked the beginning of the fourth phase. This phase coincided with the Spanish colonization of the Philippines, which attracted Philippine merchants to come to the archipelago due to the lucrative Manila-Acapulco galleon trade. The Philippines in relation to the Chinese perception of Southeast Asia maritime space. The eventual expansion of Chinese commercial activities abroad gave rise to written works that provided the Chinese people with accounts of the commercial ports and polities extending from Southeast Asia to the east coast of Africa. Among the important writings in the Song period are Ling Wai Tai Da, Chu Fan Chi, Nan Hai Chi, and Dao Chi Lu. These works and all other books published during these periods presented to the Chinese readers some of new geographical concepts which indicated the evolving geographical understanding at the time. Ling Wai Dai Da was written in 1178 by a local magistrate in southwest China named Zhu Chufei. It identifies 4 maritime regions that are associated with present-day Southeast Asia, namely Dongdayang Hai, Nanhai, Xinan Hai, and Nandayang Hai. So Dongdayang Hai is the Great Eastern Ocean, Xinan Hai is Southwest Sea, Nandayang Hai is the Great Southern Ocean. Of these 4 maritime spaces, Nanhai was considered the most important because of its association with Srivijaya, which was the main trading center south of China. The waters farther to the south of Srivijaya were called Nandayang Hai. Far away to the west of this Southeast Asian kingdom was the Xinan Hai. Moreover, Zhu Chufei's description of Dongdayang Hai illustrates the Chinese paucity of knowledge about the Philippines and eastern Indonesia. So in this text, he writes, this text here, southwest of Hainan, there's a sea called Zhaojiang that is presently the Gulf of Tonkin. In the middle of the sea, there is a 3-joint current which breaks into 3 due to the strong waves. So one current flows southward to the Sea of the Barbarian Lands, one to the north towards the Sea of Guangdong, Fujian, and Zhejiang provinces, and one to the east towards the boundless place called Dongdayang Hai, or the Great Eastern Ocean. There are 2 interesting features that can be found in the Great Eastern Ocean. So one is the one in the red rectangle and the other one that's inside the yellow rectangle. So in this, the first one, the one inside the red rectangle, Hirth and Rakhel translate this Changsha Shitang Shu Wan Li as long bank of sands and rocks, some myriads li in length. The translation follows the principles that words in classical Chinese texts are often monosyllabic. That is, each character represents a particular concept. So Chang, Zhang, Lo, Long, Sha, San, Shi, stone, bank, Tang, bank, Shu, a mountain, 1, 10,000, and Li, mile. Sinologist Roderick Pitak, however, argues that there are disyllabic concepts in this set of characters, namely Changsha and Shitang, which are translated as reefs and atolls respectively. He notes that these words are often given the attributes Qian Li, 1,000 miles, or 1 Li, 10,000 miles, in different combinations in various Song and Yuan sources. Hence, Changsha Shitang Shu 1 Li could also be read as reefs and atolls measuring 10,000 miles, which could point to the reefs and atolls in the South China Sea. Another feature that can be found in the Great Eastern Ocean is the Weilu, where the water drains off into the Jiuyu. These concepts are derived from Taoism. In the Taoist classic Zhuangzi, one can read, "There is no water in the world larger than the ocean. All rivers revert to it ceaselessly, yet it is not filled. It leaks away at Weilu continuously. yet it is not empty. Meanwhile, Joyo, or ninefold darkness, is one of the Taoist conception of hell, which spreads out in 9 directions, 4 cardinal, 4 ordinal, and the center. However, sinologist Angela Schottenhammer argues that Welu is actually the Kuroshu current. So there can be 2 interpretations of the text here. The Great Eastern Ocean could be a site of a mythical place bounded by a bank of sand and stone, and where its water drains off into the netherworld. The other one, it is where the atolls and sandbanks, as well as the Kuroshu current, can be found. Regardless of whichever of these interpretation one takes, it is evident that the Philippines are nowhere in this interpretation. Jufanju, so the next book, Jufanju, was penned in 1225 by Zhao Rugua as superintendent of the Maritime Trade Office in Chuangzhou. Like Lingwai Daida, it describes that to the east of Hainan are Qianli Changsha, 1,000 reefs, and Wanli Shitang, 10,000 atolls. And beyond that is the boundless ocean where the sea and sky blend their color. The Welu is no longer existent in the text. Instead, it provides description of 2 Philippine polities, namely Mayi, believed to be the present-day Mindoro, and Sanyu, which is composed of Calamian, Palawan, and Busuanga. It also identifies other places such as Baipuyan, Pulilu, Lijindung, Liuxin, and Lihan. The identification of some places within the archipelago may indicate that the Chinese trading network started to extend to the Philippines during the book's publication. During the Yuan period, geographical concepts of the preceding dynasties were discarded. In Nanhai Zhi, written by Chen Dachen in 1304, Southeast Asia was now divided into 3 maritime regions assigned to 5 polities. Danmaling and Srivijaya controlled Shaoxiang. Dongyang Funi, or the Shaoxiang is the small Western Ocean. Dongyang Funiguo, which is probably Brunei, took charge of Xiao Dongyang, or the small Eastern Ocean. Tanjung Pura and Java ruled the Ta Dongyang, or the Big Eastern Ocean. Xiaodongyang is comprised mainly of the Sulu Sea and the waters off the coast of Sarawak. The polities found in these maritime regions include Malilu, or Manila, Mayi, Mindoro, Maykun, Manukan in Zamboanga, Butuan, Sulu, Shahuchong or Shukon in Zamboanga, Yachen, Oton, Iloilo, Manolono. It's either the Maranaos of Mindoro or the Malano tribe in Kalimantan, and Wenduling or Cotabato. Based on the text, it is hard to determine the relationship between Brunei and the rest of the Philippine polities. Nevertheless, the list may be an indication that a maritime network within this space may have existed. Wang Dayuan sailed with seafaring traders in 1330s and wrote Dawi Jilu upon his return to China. In this book, the maritime regions in Southeast Asia are further reduced to 2, Dongyang and Xiyang, the Eastern Ocean and the Western Ocean. The Strait of Singapore served as the boundary between these 2 oceans. With this demarcation, it appears that most of the Southeast Asian countries were found in Eastern Ocean, while the Western Ocean corresponds to the modern-day Indian Ocean. So, according to Wang Dayuan, he visited 99 countries. So, and according to he divided it into Dongyang and Xi'an, with these two, Longyamen, which is Singapore, and Kunlun, which is one of the islands near to Vietnam, as the boundary between the Eastern and Western Ocean. The division between Eastern and Western Oceans was maintained in the Ming Dynasty, albeit the border of these two oceans was moved from Singapore to Kalimantan or Borneo. As a result, the mainland Southeast Asia and Western Indonesia are now found in the Western Ocean, while the Philippines and Eastern Indonesia are located in the Eastern Ocean. When the Chinese writers in the Ming Dynasty began to give details to the trade routes to Southeast Asia, two main lines emerged, the Western and the Eastern Road. So this is from the text from Tung She Yang Kao. And what it says is that in Wen Lai, that is Brunei, it's where the Eastern Ocean ends and where the Western Ocean begins. The Mayans' monopoly on inter-island trade. Long before Chinese merchants aggressively searched for foreign products abroad, foreign traders sold those goods to Chinese ports. Direct trade between China and the Philippines only occurred when the Chinese traders came to the Philippines in the 13th century. Surprisingly, Chinese traders limited their activities in Mayi and Sanyu. From Mayi, Chinese goods were transported to other islands for barter. The existing imperial regulations may have partly influenced the Chinese traders to remain in Mayi. First, there was a requirement to register their port of call abroad and to remain there, which obliged them to stay in Mayi during the whole duration of their overseas trip. Second, the time restraint imposed on foreign trips prevented the Chinese merchants from going to places that may cause a delay in their return trip. Furthermore, the Chinese merchants who docked in Mayi were left with few options, since the chieftain highly regulated the transactions, aiming to monopolize the inter-island trade. Local traders, not the Chinese merchants, unloaded the goods from the foreign ships and brought them to other islands. The active participation of the chieftain may have ensured that no goods were lost upon unloading and that local traders paid off their debts after they bartered the foreign goods with local products in other islands. Key to the efficient regulation was the designation of an area for trading. In the Chinese text, the word used was guanchang. The character guan, when used as a noun, denotes an officer, a government official, and an office bearer. As a modifier, it assumes the meaning of government, official, or public. Meanwhile, the components of the character chang, namely tu and yang, indicate that chang, in its crudest sense, denotes a ground open to the sun, or simply put, an open space. Hence, the term official's place in Hearth and Rockhill's translation points to an open space designated for official functions regulated by the chieftain. In this sense, the chieftain of Mayi not only acted as a political figure, but also as an economic manager in his polity. Chinese traders developed friendly relations with the local ruler to counterbalance the chieftain's total control of the business transactions. This was illustrated by the presentation of a gift to the chieftain of Mayi upon their arrival. The function of this act was to create a symbolic bond of friendship, which had a conflict mitigating effect in case of inevitable disagreements during business deals. This bond may have also obliged the chieftain to extend his protection on foreign traders. thus enabling them to stay in Mayi for an extended period. Furthermore, the Mayi chieftain's sphere of influence went beyond his own polity. Zhu Fengzhi recorded that San Yu, Bai Puyan, Li Jingdong, Liu Xin were Shu, or subordinate to Mayi. In the Chinese text, the chieftain of Mayi had a title of Qiu Jiang. The character Qiu by itself stands for tribal chief, and by pairing it with another character, Jiang, that is elder or head, a Qiu Jiang denotes a paramount chief. As a paramount chief, the chieftain of Mayi may have exercised political power over the subordinate polities, but may not necessarily have control in economic matters, as illustrated in the case of San Yu. Sailing directly to San Yu was a way for some Chinese traders to circumvent the chieftain's control over trading. Since San Yu was politically part of Mayi, it would appear that those traders who bypassed Mayi technically did not violate the imperial regulations for Chinese merchants to remain in their registered ports of call abroad. Mayi's monopoly in maritime trade finally ended during the Yuan period due to the lifting of the regulations that limited the activities of Chinese merchants, which eventually enabled them to explore more faraway places without the fear of being penalized. One best example is Sulu. In Zhu Fengzhi, pearl was recorded as one of the products of Mayi. However, in Dawi Julu, these items disappeared from their inventory. Instead, pearls were listed as an item of Sulu. Seemingly, the Chinese traders bypassed Mayi and went straight to Sulu, where they traded their products with pearl. So the next section is Pishayi and the maritime raids. During the Song period, an ethnic group unknown to the Chinese appeared suddenly in the coastal villages of Chuanzhou and devastated them. Zhao Rugua, in his book Zhu Fengzhi, identifies this group as the Pishayi and provides the following information. Their language is incomprehensible to the Chinese. Chinese merchants have no prior interaction with them. Their state of savageness can be observed through their nakedness, like wild animal-like ferocity and cannibalism. Their place of origin is very close to Panghu Island, so close that they see each other smoke and fire. They make raids in the coastal villages of Chuanzhou, particularly in Shuiyao and Weitu during the Chunxi reign, injuring and killing countless inhabitants. They are fond of iron, so much so that they take with them anything that is made of iron, such as spoons, chopsticks, iron knockers, and soldiers' armor. They do not use boats, but bamboo rafts, which can be folded up like screens. Zhao Rugua's work may be well known among non-Chinese speakers due to the English translation of the text, but it is not the first and only written account about the Pishayi raiders. 50 years earlier, Lin Guangchong writes an official document that describes the raid. He said, in the past, there was a place overseas called Pishayi, whose folks appeared suddenly in Pinghu, an island of Chuanzhou, and then to Beijing, which was no more than 20 miles away from the prefectural seat. They were fearless when they stared at a soldier's sword. They ate living humans as their meals, as if they were livestock. When someone took rulers and iron, they scrambled to collect them first. Wherever they went, knives, axes, hooks, and chisels, among others, were cut off. At the end of the raid, they would walk outside the ridge, killing those captured persons to serve as their provisions. They carried their boats and moved towards the sea, appearing and disappearing in the water, as if they were walking on flat ground. In the neighboring areas of Chaozhou and Huizhou, no one was able to fend them off. These people were nevertheless unpredictable. At first, no one knew where they took refuge, but they still have the tendency to harm other people. A few commonalities and differences can be observed when the two accounts are compared. Both accounts describe the savageness of the Pishaya people and their fondness of iron. However, they differ regarding the time and place of the raids and the sea vessels the group used. Whereas Zhao Rugua identifies a couple of coastal villages in Chuanzhou as the sites of the maritime raid, the account of Lin Guangchong details the stretch of devastation caused by the Pishaya raiders, which extends from Penghu Island near Taiwan to Beijing in the Fujian province and farther to Chaozhou in eastern Guangdong and Huizhou in the Pearl River Delta. Moreover, Zhu Fengzhi fixed the time of the raid during the Chunxi period, but the raid Lin Guangcheng described could have occurred in Qiandao era, which was in 1165 to 1173. Finally, Zhu Fengzhi explicitly mentions bamboo raft, while Lin identifies Zhou as their mode of transport and records an imagery on how a boat was carried from the shore to the sea. He specifically used the term jia, the one inside the yellow box. To carry, the meaning of it is to carry something under one's arm, to describe the act of launching the boat. While it is impossible to carry a boat under one's arm, the imagery portrayed here may be that of men holding the boat's outriggers under their arms as they march towards the sea. Details about the raid in Penghu is written in Wang Dayu Shendao Bei, which is a stone tablet guarding a tomb passage on which are engraved the deeds of the deceased. The text appears in Zhu Bida's book Wen Zhongji, published in 1201. So it says, 4 months of the 7th year of Shendao, Wang Dayu started to administer Chuanzhou. In the middle of the sea, there is a large island called Pinghu, where Chinese settlers planted Malay wheat and hemp. There were Pishai barbarians who set sail and suddenly appeared here. Their bodies were pitch black and their language was incomprehensible. They seized all the crops. When the soldiers were mobilized to arrest them, they returned to the waters and got hold of nothing except their boats. Their captives served as their guides as they looted the nearby town of Qizhou. Thereupon, troops were dispatched to patrol in spring and summer. In autumn and winter, the troops started to return to Chuanzhou. The efforts and expenses were enormous, so the official Wang Dayu visited this place and built a district of 200 houses. The navy was stationed there, so the barbarians did not return. Zhou's use of the character Zhou, the one inside the red circle, and the expression young fan inside this yellow circle, which means to hoist the sail, indicate that the Pishaya people arrived in Penghu using boats with a sail. Furthermore, until the construction of a permanent base for Chinese troops was made, their deployment was only seasonal, that is during autumn and summer, indicating that attacks were made during those seasons. The incident in Penghu also appears in the short biography of Wang Dayu that is included in Lu Ye's book Gongkuiji. So it reads, 4th month of the 7th year of the Qiandao era, Wang Dayu started to administer Chuanzhou, arrived in the prefecture. The prefecture is bordering the sea, where in the middle there is a sandy island measuring several tens of thousands of mu called Pinghu. As the Pishai Island barbarians suddenly arrived, they seized all the cultivated plants. On another day, they also went up the sea coast to murder and plunder. More than 400 invaders were captured, while their leader was eradicated. At the same time, those who remained were scattered through the region. At first, frontier guards were dispatched each time the southerly wind was encountered, which was very laborious and inconvenient. As the official Wang reached their land, He built 200 houses, sent a general and troops to be stationed there. There was an officer with a rank who was accustomed to stealing and receiving rewards. All of a sudden, he reported that an invasion had again taken place. He was straightaway arrested and brought to the courtyard. He thought that he had done meritorious deed. The official Wang Dayu said, "The appearance of the Pishai is as dark as the lacquer, that their tattoos are indistinguishable. What makes these people clothing and personal adornments entirely different?" Scrutinized it. As it turned out, the great traders of Cambodia have 4 boats that have left and 2 boats that have returned. The 2 boats being suspected as that of Pishai is a false accusation. The first of Lo Ye's account corresponds to Zhu Bida's account. It tells the looting incident and the establishment of permanent troops in Pingho. The expression "Mei Yu Nanfeng," the one in the red rectangle, which means each time the southern winds is encountered, in relation to the deployment of soldiers to protect the island, suggests that these raiders were dependent on monsoon winds and arrived in Pangho on a seasonal basis. This certainly agrees with Zhu Bida's account that Chinese troops were intermittently deployed during the spring and summer months. As a follow-up, Lu reported that one official made a false claim that Pishai had encroached their territory, to which Wang Tai reminded the officer that these people have dark skin, so dark that one could no longer distinguish their tattoos. There's also another document by Jen Tishu and another document from Chuanju Fuji Xuanlu. It says, on the 7th month of the Chenda rain, island bandits Pishai pillaged the coastal area. And again, in the 8th year, they once again intruded using seafaring boats. So again, inside that red circle, and they attacked the Shreyao, so an outpost was built there. So where is Pishai? Scholars don't agree where Pishai is, but the one key to this where Pishai is actually found in the account Zhao account on Liu Chou. And the problem with the classical Chinese is that the original text, they don't have punctuations. So the problem with modern readers is what punctuation do you have to use? So one Chinese scholar said that it should be a comma there. So if you read this text is about the traders of Liu Chou. They went to San Yu to bring their products and sell them. And then after the word San Yu, there's a phrase, Bang Yu Pishaye. So which means besides it is Pishaye. So if you put a comma there, so the meaning would be San Yu, besides it, so it meaning San Yu is Pishaye. But other scholars said that it should be a period after San Yu. So if you stop after San Yu and you read Bang Yu Pishaye, so it could mean Pishaye, the it means Liu Chou. So besides Liu Chou is Pishaye. So those who object that the Pishai are the Visayan people argue that given the distance between China and the Visayas, it would be impossible for the Visayan raiders to reach China using bamboo rafts. But based on what I have read earlier, most of the sources written before the publication of Jufanji identify boat and not bamboo rafts as the mode of transport of the Pishai raiders. And these boats have sails, as indicated in the expression yang fan, that is to hoist the sail, and possibly had outriggers as suggested by the expression jajo, to carry under one's arm during the launching of the boat. The roads were seasonal as the raiders rely on monsoon winds. And there was also the story of a corrupt officer who made the false claim that the two boats that originally came from Cambodia were said to be Pishaya boats. Their boats must have looked the same because the point of distinction was not the boat, but the appearance and the tattoo of the Pishaya people. Another argument for those who object that Pishaya are not the Visayans is that Pishaya come from southern Taiwan. So based on the account of Lin Guangzhou, he said that he didn't know where they come from, and Joe Pidas and Lo Yue's account never mentioned Liu Chou, but implied that the Visaya came from the southern area because they have to rely on the southerly winds to reach there. And then Jen Disho mentioned that the Pishaya raiders reached the mainland, but he never made a claim that they came from Liu Chou. And then Zhao Rugua expressed an expression which indicate the proximity of Pishaya from Penghu. Same expression was used in Wenshan Tongkao to indicate the proximity of Penghu to Liu Chou. And then more than half of the content of Jufanji on Liu Chou was actually copied from the history of the Soi dynasty, which was completed in the year 636. And Penghu was only settled by the Chinese around 13th century. So it could not be included in the Liu Chou account. So Zhao Rugua could have created a Pishaya country to accommodate Penghu. And then there's also an account from Yang Bowen that there were raiders from Babuyan. So the Visayan practice of Kayao could have taken in several stages from Visayas to Babuyan, then to southern Taiwan, farther to Penghu, and finally to China. And their captives from Penghu could have served as their guides to the mainland. Do I still have time?
Yes, sir.
Oh, so we go to Dao Jilu, and so with the lifting of restrictions that limited their activities overseas, China's merchants sailed to all corners of Southeast Asia during the Yuan period, searching for rare animals, precious timbers, aromatic substances, and expensive minerals. However, for some other reasons, they excluded Visayas from their trading network. In the book Dao Julu, Wang Dayuan gave an account of a place called Pishaya, which undeniably is the Visayas, as archaeological, ethnohistoric, and linguistic evidence corroborates his description of the place. So first, Wang may have the exact location of Pishaya in mind when he wrote this phrase, "Kenchu Hai Dong Chi Ge." This has been translated into English as out of the way spot in the Eastern Ocean, or a remote land in the Eastern Seas. The problem with this translation is that they equated Haidong, that's under inside the red rectangle, as Eastern Ocean, when in fact the term for Eastern Ocean is Dongyang, the one here inside the green box. So if we go back to how the Chinese name their places, there are actually two components. So we have the prefix and the suffix. The prefix is the specific, and the suffix is generic. So for example, if we take the word Dongyang, so yang is the ocean, so that's the generic, and then Dong, east is the specific, so it means that Eastern Ocean. But here in Haidong, Dong is the generic and Hai is the specific. So it could mean to the east of the sea. So this one should be, if in my translation, it should be translated into remotely located at the eastern periphery of the ocean. Then there's also expression "Chihu Beiru," so it means it's very hot, and the character "ho" means multiple times. So when Wang Dayan wrote this, he was comparing it to his place of origin, Chuanzhou. So it means it's very hot in compared to Chuanzhou. So it means it was in the tropics. And then if we go to the order, how the countries were ordered in the Taoijilu, Pishayu is in number 43. So if others would claim that it is in Taiwan, Taiwan is number 2. So one Chinese scholar said that the order of the countries were actually in relation to the distance of this country to China. So that's why it starts with Penghu, because Penghu is the closest to China, and then Liuqiu, that is Taiwan. So there's no way that Pishayi could be in Taiwan or near that place, because it's in the order, it's in number 43. And then there's also another Chinese scholar said that you could actually plot the trade routes using the order of these countries. So if you look at the illustration here, you can see like Penghu, Liuqiu, Mindoro, Mayi. So that's the order here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 31, 35, 36, 46, 47, 48. And you can make a trade route from the order based on the table of contents of the book. So second, the economic activities in Visayas. So the first one is Shan Ping Kwang. So it means the closest literal translation to this is the one from Chen. This is the hills or the mountains are flat and deserted. So Kwang, so it could also mean that the people at that time, the Visayan people, they neglected or they did not exploited the uplands or the hinterlands. And then there's the Tian De Shao Bu Duo Zhongzhi, which means that the arable fields are small and not much is grown. And then it means that the Visayan people during the time were only doing subsistence farming. And then there says Di U Chu Chan, which means the land does not produce anything. It could mean that there were no precious minerals and metals that were found in that place. So interesting, we have here the expression lulu, and the meaning of lulu is to take prisoner and to plunder. And actually, maritime raidings was not exclusive of the Visayan people, but in each place that maritime raids happen, Wang Dayan used different terms, like in Long Yamen, in Singapore, and in Lambri, he used Jialu. to take force and plunder, or Kolu. In Jangalo, Lu to invade and plunder, and Lulu to take prisoners and plunder. The exclusion of Pishai from China's trading network can be attributed to the negative reputation carried by the people of that place who were known for organizing maritime raids. Wang reported that the people in eastern oceans were scared and fled when they heard Pishai. However, it should be noted that Wang cited in his book that maritime raids were not only prevalent in Pishai, but also in Vietnam, in Thailand, Jonggolo in eastern Java, Singapore Strait, Alambri in Sumatra. Noticeable, however, is the use of the specific terms for each of these places, which may indicate the manner raids were conducted. Surprisingly, the meaning Lu is captured in the indigenous term Kayao, which originally denotes an intermittent ventures to places far away from one's own to take slaves and pillage for wealth. However, participants of Kayao were more interested in slaves since the purchase of slaves was an ordinary area for investing surplus wealth, according to Scott. Kayao was prevalent because the Visayans considered it a socially approved deed, and its participants were conferred with social privileges and reserved rewards. So here's a description made by the author on how they capture their potential victims. So at times they pack dried provisions and row smaller boats towards faraway lands of outsiders. There they lie in ambush in wild mountains and search the valleys where no people live permanently. When meeting with fishermen or forward gatherers, they suddenly grab them to bring them back to their own country and sell them into slavery. Each man sells for 2 taels of gold, hence the people from outside communicate them for release. Also in Dao Julu, the hairstyle was also mentioned. And it's interesting that in the book Dao Julu, each country's hairstyle was described, and there were 4 hairstyles that were described there. So there was the Yaji, the Wanji, the Chuji, and the Tsuji. And the description made by Diego de Artieda somehow corresponds what was written here. Both men and women suffer no hair to grow in their bodies except on their head. They wear their hair long and take good care of it so that it will grow. The men bind their hair on the crown of their head with a small piece of gauze, and the women bind it with bands made of their hair itself. So the hairstyle that was prevalent in Pishar was the Tsuji. This is important because according to the Chinese, hair binding was a mark of adulthood and being civilized, and unbounded hair was the mark of a madman or a ghost. So when the author wrote that the Visayans bounded their hair, that means that they were already civilized at these times. Also described in this text is the tattoos and the pudong. It says that they use black sap and prick their bodies up to their necks, and they wind red silk around yellow cloth that they usually use to tie up. Next, the political situation in Pishai. So there are only 4 characters, Huo, Chujiang. So Chujiang is the paramount chief. So, and U is a negation. So it means that there was no paramount chief. So if there's no paramount chief, if the supposed headman of this place is supposed to be paramount chief, so it's not a state level polity. But then there was no paramount chief, so it also corresponds to the one of the descriptions made by one of the first Spanish colonizers. There are no kings or rulers worth of mention throughout this archipelago, but there were many chiefs who dominated these less powerful. As there are many without power, there was no security from the continual wars that were waged between them. So what can we learn from these texts from Tawi Jilu? It says that Visayas was not strategically located along the sailing route of the Chinese merchant ships, that the Visayans only practiced subsistence farming. Visayas was not a producer of precious metals and rare minerals. There was a prevalence of maritime raid, or shall we say kidnap for ransom in that area, which scared of foreign traders. And there was no coherent political structure uniting the entirety of the Visayas. And Visayas suffered from a case of bad reputation. That's why the Chinese merchants did not come to the Visayas. Now we go to the Ming period. Works published during the Song and Yuan periods did not provide specific information on the roads which connected the various overseas ports of coal. Significant details of the maritime route started to appear only in the 15th century with the expeditions of the court eunuchs. One of the crucial sources of Chinese trade routes during the Ming period was the so-called rotor, which illustrates the routes in words rather than graphic form. It usually follows the formula from place A, steer X degrees, after Y watches, you make place B. Interestingly, the Chinese compass directions are not designated with numbers, but with names. There are 24 points in the compass with 15 degrees intervals that bear names taken from the 8 trigrams, 10 heavenly steams, or 24 earthly branches. The Chinese measurement of time is gong. This one, gong, which is equivalent to 2.4 hours. Two known Ming rotors describe various sea routes to the Philippines. Although these books were published in the 17th century, Pitak argued that some elements were already orally transmitted long before they appeared in printed forms. So this one is the Dongsi Yangkao, and this one is the Eastern Trade Road. This book, published in 1617, was written by Zhang Xie, a scholar who devoted his life to studying geography and history. The author draws his data from the information gathered from seafarers. The more substantial part of the book provides historical and geographical notes in various countries. The 9th Juan, or chapter, describes the sea route from China to various countries. It also includes a manual or navigation theory and practice. Zhang followed the distinction between the Western and Eastern Ocean and elaborated the trunk routes to these two oceans and branches. So this was the route in the one written in the Dongxi Yangkao. So it starts in Taiwu in China, goes to Panghu, to Kaohsiung, to Apari, and then to Ilocos, Pangasinan, up to Luzon, which is Manila. Then it goes to Chuweishan, which is said to be Cavite or Batangas. And then another road goes to Iningang, which is the Ilin Island near Mindoro. And it goes to Cuyo Island. And then there's another road that goes to Hanse, that is in Panay. And it goes to Uton in Iloilo. And one road goes to Haishan, then to Dapitan, and then it branches out to Jiaoyi is a Kawit in Zamboanga, Jujima, that's Basilan, Maguindanao, up to Ternate. And there's another from Lubang Island to Palawan, Balabac Island, up to Vernay. So another book is the Shunfang Xiangsong, which appear in which is kept in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The character Shunfang Xiangsong, which can be translated into English as "May fair wind accompany you," is the Chinese blessings for sailor, but has been designated as the title of the manuscript since it was published in 1961. While scholars do not come into agreement as to the date it was written, they seem to agree that the roads found in this manuscript were based on the knowledge acquired by the Chinese during the 7 expeditions in the early 15th century. According to Mills, the extant copy of the manuscript was written in 1620, but its content referred to the condition in 1430. Shunfang Xiangsong includes a manual on navigational theory and practices, as well as mnemonics and prayers. There are 100 particular voyages recorded in the manuscript, and 8 of them involve some places in the Philippines, which can be categorized in this manner. So there's from China to the Philippines, from Philippines to Southeast Asia, from China to Southeast Asia via Philippines, and from other Asian countries to the Philippines. As a destination for Chinese merchants, Cebu only appears in Jinan Zhangfa, which contains a manual on navigational theory and practice, as well as a detailed instructions of 53 particular voyages. Although the book was published during the Qing period, its contents refer to the conditions before 1607, and the recorded voyages may come from the 1471 to 1588 period. The road from Manila to Cebu in Jinan Zhangfa only listed the toponyms that sailors passed through on their way to Cebu and their return trip to Manila.
Sir Genesis, sorry to interrupt. You have five minutes to wrap up the presentation.
Okay. So what we just discussed is how the Visayas was excluded from the maritime trade. So now in the inclusion, the initial exclusion of the Visayas from the Chinese trade network may have been related to the maritime trades conducted by the Visayans in Panghu Islands and on the coastal towns of the villages of Fujian and Guangdong, which were the provinces that engaged actively in the maritime trade with Southeast Asia. The Chinese people who survived the raids might have suffered deep traumatic experience, and their stories reverberated down through the centuries. Even when China no longer faced a direct threat from the Visayan raiders, the Visayans still carried a bad reputation that even hearing their name could cause anxiety to Chinese merchants centuries later. It probably took ages before the Chinese would deem Visayas a safe place. To recall, Chinese merchants stopped in Mai during the Song period, and local traders distributed the foreign goods to other islands. Those who preferred not to deal directly with the chieftain of Mai went to other places, but were still within the jurisdiction of Mai. When Mai's monopoly in inter-island trade was finally broken, Chinese merchants sailed to Sulu. However, they bypassed the Visayas for fear of financial loss due to the prevalence of maritime raids in the country. It was also not worth the risk to engage in trading in that area, since the settlement there were reportedly unable to produce goods on commercial scale. If Chinese ceramics from the Song and Yuan periods ever reached Cebu, they were probably acquired through inter-island trading or maritime raids. With the ascent of the Ming Dynasty, other overseas private trading was prohibited, and the flow of goods to and from China was regulated through the tribute system. While major polities of Luzon and Mindanao sent tribute missions to the Ming court, imperial records from this period never mention any polity from the Visayas. Chinese porcelains were possibly acquired through Thailand, given the fact that Shunfang Shangsong provides a trade route from Thailand to Manukan in Mindanao. The trade network must have already been extended to the Visayas by the arrival of the Magellan expedition, since Antonio Pigafetta recorded that a Siamese chunk disembarked in Cebu for 4 days before their arrival. Carl Eugen Guthi, the head of the Mitchell expedition, also observes a connection between Mindanao and Visayas with regard to trade with China. The general impression gained from the geographical distribution of the material and the specimen themselves is that the early Chinese commerce appears to have centered about a line drawn in a northeasterly direction along the western coast of Mindanao through the central Visayas towards the southern tip of Luzon. The link between the Visayas and Thailand would have not been possible with the role of the merchants from Borneo. Historian Manel Olay said that early Spanish accounts points that it was the Bornean merchants who initially brought Visayas products to Thailand, primarily sigay shells, which was used as currency in that country. Although the Visayas did not trade directly with the merchants from China, it is possible that they engaged with Chinese-based overseas. Sinologist Papelitsky argues that the fact that a trade route between Thailand and the Philippines appeared in a Chinese source indicate that there must be Chinese involved in that network. And what attracted Chinese traders to Cebu, particularly during the Ming Dynasty, were its products, which were Cebu cow, cotton, and seaweeds. To end, the devastation in China caused by the maritime raiders from the Visayas had influenced the Chinese attitude towards the Visayas. Chinese merchants had avoided the central part of the Philippines for a long time. The process of inclusion of the Visayas into the Chinese trade network may have not been initiated by the Chinese traders from the mainland, but the Chinese diaspora in Southeast. Archaeologist Masao Nishimura proposes that Cebu, which is part of the Visayas, maintained multiple trade partners who took different trade routes. Interestingly, Thailand and Borneo had played a role in connecting the Visayas into the Maritime Silk Road. Visayas acquired Chinese commodities through the western road via Thailand and through the eastern road via Borneo. The dynamics may have changed with the arrival of the Spaniards. However, this is beyond the scope of this paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Genesis. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is very much impressed by your presentation with all the primary data that you were able to actually analyze and put into your presentation. And we already have a question here for you. Are you ready for your Q&A?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. So this is from an anonymous attendee. I read somewhere that there is an argument about Visayas, that a lot of them were white because one of them wrote Bai or white in his text. What's your opinion about this, Sir Genesis?
I haven't encountered any text that telling them that they are white. What I read a while ago, when there was an accusation about the Cambodian ships that were said to be of the Visayas, the officer said that you have to see the color of the skin of the Visayas; they are black. So I'm sorry, I haven't seen any material saying that they were white.
I see. Okay, thank you, Sir Genesis. We're still waiting for other questions from our participants, but I'm very curious about Um, how many books in Chinese were you able to actually analyze just to learn more about the Visayas within this particular maritime trade network?
Actually, there are not many. I think 4 or 5. The problem is most of the discussion about Visayas are written in Chinese, so you have to go to the Chinese sources because somehow the discussion about Visaya has been politicized uh, by Taiwan. They want to claim that it belongs to them because the conflict between China and Taiwan, and so there are not many sources at this time, but many of the secondary sources, many discussions are mostly written either by Taiwanese writers, Chinese writers, and there are even some claims by Japanese scholars that the Pishaya people are from Japan. So,
I see. Yeah, but this is your presentation actually highlights the importance of scholars to actually know the language in order to access these information that are written by Taiwanese or by Chinese scholars themselves. So I'm personally very much impressed of how you were able to navigate all of these primary sources and present this analysis.
when I was in Germany, I studied under Professor Pitak. He's one of the leading scholars worldwide in Asian maritime trade. So every time we have class, we read one text and then discuss. So that's only thing we do. He gives us a text, and then the following week we have to come back and then discuss that text. So that's why I'm familiar with some of the texts regarding maritime trade in Southeast Asia and China.
And is this part of your doctoral dissertation, Sir Genesis?
Actually, I did not finish my my PhD, so sorry. In the invitation, I think they put PhD in my name, so I think there was a misunderstanding there. So, but still, at the moment, there's a book actually which compiles all the reference about the Philippines in one book. But there's no English translation of it. So during my free time, I read it and then do a little bit of translation. But I think it will take time because it's a 300 pages book. But if you translate it, then it would value into 1,000 pages.
That's a really huge work for you, but it seems that you're very much enjoying this as your passion project.
Yeah, sort of a personal project because I'm no longer in the academy. So during my free time, because if I don't do this, then I will lose my ability to read the Chinese. So as much as possible, I do something that would make me get in touch with the Chinese. So sometimes I say,
this is a very good sort of practice for you in learning Chinese.
Yeah, because I'm still learning, no? Because it's a difficult language, especially if you go to the classical Chinese, because the grammar is totally different from Mandarin Chinese, and the original ones, they don't have punctuation, so you have to decide where to stop and what images you have. So when I was studying classical Chinese, there were only two of us, and the other one was European, and I'm Filipino. He was very good in grammar, and like 50% in classical Chinese has to do with imagination, because you have to great images from what you read. So he could explain well with the grammar. I was not so good with the grammar, but I could imagine what was written on the text. So it complemented when we studied together, the two of us.
I see. Yeah. All right. Sir Jobbers is actually asking when will your book be published? Looking forward to it.
Are you going to publish this, Jobbers?
Very soon? Kind of shadows.
I don't know. I'm still working on it.
Well, I think all of us will be very much looking forward to it, Sir Genesis. I think we have another question for you, sir, from an anonymous attendee. Do you think Chu Fan Chu has an accurate hermeneutical analysis of the culture of Filipino people during the pre-colonial period?
We have to understand that those scholars, they were bureaucrat scholars. So during the imperial period of China, you cannot enter into the bureaucracy unless you pass the civil service exam. And the civil service exam was about the Chinese classics. So you have to learn about the classics, Confucius, and that's why most of the bureaucrat scholars, they have a Confucian point of view. So they describe those outside of China as the barbarians. So from the there's already a distinction between Chinese and barbarians. So and their description is always like China-centric. So they were more superior morally, intellectually, compared to those barbarians. So you have to, when you read these books, you have to read it that they are more superior, and probably the descriptions about the maritime raid in China, that they eat people and what was that? It may not be true. They were just trying to portray that these are animal-like people, that they are savages, but they may not be actually true.
Yeah, but that was a very controversial claim from those documents that you actually presented. All right, we have another question over here from Giovanni Putong. What was really then the purpose or purposes why Chinese engaged in business aside of bartering goods? Do you think they want to influence Chinese goods for their advantage? Have you seen a primary document or legal manifesto coming from the dynastic ruler in China to connect with other distant lands, such as areas in Southeast Asia? Thank you.
So, what was the first? How many questions were there? Were there two questions?
This is three questions.
Oh, three questions. So, what was the first question again?
What was really the purpose of Chinese when they engaged in business aside from bartering goods?
The Chinese only mean business, no? So they wanted to supply the demands in China. There was a growing demand for spices, for a lot of things in China, because they became richer there, so they want something more exotic. So that's why, and as I mentioned in the first part, the imperial government, they allowed Chinese to go and buy foreign products and bring it to China, which was not possible earlier because they have to rely on the tribute system. So the tribute system is that foreign merchants come to China, they offer something to the emperor, and the rest they sell it to the market. So if you under the tribute system, so China just wait until some products would come to China. So if for example, no pepper would come to China, then they have to wait for another year until pepper would come to China. But this time, when the Song Dynasty allowed allowed the Chinese merchants to go abroad, so they can have pepper the whole year round because they have steady supply of pepper, for example. So the second question, what was that?
I think Giovanni is asking, did they do this sort of like business to influence like other people to their advantage?
No, I don't think so that they use this for their advantage.
Mhm. All right. And the third question is, have you seen primary documents or legal manifesto coming from the dynastical ruler in China to connect with other distant land? Like,
Oh, there are plenty.
Hmm.
And before, once a century ago, most of the documents were translated by Western scholars. But now the Chinese themselves, they're producing more and more about these trade networks. I think 3 years ago there was a 3 band books just about the trade routes, which I'm trying to acquire, but I haven't got it yet. So there are a lot of books and a lot of conferences about trading networks with China.
Mhm. All right. I hope, Giovanni, that answer your questions, your 3 questions. And I think that's the last question for user Genesis
Okay.
from the Q&A. All right. Thank
Yeah,
you
thank you very much. Hope you were not bored of my presentation.
for very much enlightened and very interested to learn more and read more about your work on these
Yeah.
Chinese documents. So we hope you'll be able to have more free time and
Yeah.
your translation work. Yes. Thank you very much, Sir Genesis.
Thank,
Yeah. And that ends our morning session, panel A with Dr. John Allen Peterson and Sir Genesis Velez. Thank you very much for your presentations, and we hope that all of you who attended this morning's panel would be able to join us once again in the afternoon with Dr. Jobbers Reyes Versales and Dr. Earl Jude Cleope. So they will be, we will be back on in the afternoon at 1 p.m. So you can stay in the Zoom perhaps, because I think we will be still using the same link. So if you want to stick around, you can stay here, or you might want to log out and enjoy your lunch for before the panel in the afternoon. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you once again later this afternoon.